Today's subject is about models going on photo shoots or auditions. I wrote a book many years ago called Meet Me for Murder, and it was about the Christy Johnson case that I worked on, in which Christy Johnson went on an audition up in the Hollywood Hills, and was later, her body was found strangled. At about the same time, I was working on a case involving the death of Kimberly Pandelios, who in 1992 went on a photo shoot up in the LA mountains and never returned. Same, I worked on a case of Linda Sobek. Her body was found in 1995 just off the Angeles Crest Highway, buried in a shallow grave, very close to Kimberly. Is there a connection between the two? For a while there, we thought there was. I think you're going to find it very interesting how we solved both cases. Linda Sobek's was quickly solved. However, Kimberly's case, it took 12 years of investigation and prosecution to bring the killer to justice. So let's get started. What's our topic today? The Hollywood models vanish in LA mountains, better known as the David Rademaker and Charles Rathbun case. Well, what's it all about? The disappearance of a model on February 27, 1992 of Kimberly Pandelios. Well, what was that all about? She decided to go on a photo shoot at that day, and she wanted to be a model, and she had modeling jobs down in Florida. She moved to Hollywood area with her husband and newborn, and she was trying to find modeling jobs, and she noticed in the Hollywood Express various photographers would advertise for models that they wanted to do photo shoots with, and she found one, and it was a photographer by the name of Paul. And so she contacted him and found out he was doing a off-road merchandise photo shoot, and he was willing to pay her, and she was willing to do the job. So they worked out a date, and she got her hair all done, get ready to go on that, to do the photo shoot. She said goodbye to her son, who was 15 months old, with the babysitter. So she left to go on that photo shoot up in the mountains with this Paul. Well, that evening she didn't return, and her husband gets concerned. Peter didn't know where she was. She was supposed to be home by 5 o'clock, and she wasn't. He called all around, her friends, relatives, nobody knew where she was. So he contacted the police department and tried to put in a missing persons report for his wife, Kimberly Pandelios. And so he's having a tough time at home that night, wondering where could she be. And the next morning, he gets a phone call from the police department indicating that his wife's car had been burnt, totally burned up in the mountains. What did that mean? Why would her car be burned up in the mountains? So that was what he was wondering, why. And the detectives were up there where the car was burnt, and you can see the marks there where it caught on fire. And right next to it, by the trunk area, was a handcuff key, as well as there was charcoal lighter fluid and a lighter down on the side of the hill there. Wow, what does that mean, and where was this? Well, it was quite a ways up from La Cañada, Foothill Boulevard there, about 19 miles up the Angeles Crest Highway, and is near the entrance to the CRISTO campground. And there's a little roadway on the side that kind of goes back into, well, there's some campsites there. And now right there, you can see the burn marks where Kimberly's car was found burned, right there. Okay, doesn't make any sense. Why would it occur there, and why was her car burned? Well, you know, they wanted to check out. She had called this Paul, the photographer, several times before setting up the photo shoot, and they called that number back. And there is no Paul there. All it goes to is to a David Rademaker, who's not named Paul, and he didn't have anything to do with photography. So it didn't add up. There's nothing as far as the phone records that are going to help him out. Then about, a week or so later, April the 4th, under this bridge on the Angeles Crest Highway was this day planner, and a hiker found it down below the bridge there near the stream, and it turned out that was Kimberly's day planner. What was it doing down below this bridge? A lot of questions. Well, time went by, you know, all of 1992, and then we get into 1993, and almost a year later, on March the 3rd, 1993, there are some hikers, and they're in the Angeles National Forest, and they were just wandering around. They'd gone on a hike near the Monte CRISTO campground. Nice area, a little hilly side. There's a creek on the one side and kind of a hillside on the other. So they're kind of walking along and kind of got off the path a little bit, and they were kind of checking things out. And as you know, hikers do, sometimes, you know, they'll see things and they'll kick it. Maybe it's a rock, maybe it's just grass, or maybe it's just some leaves. And it was a bone, some type of bones, and they leaned over, started looking, and it turned out it was a skull. There was a skull covered by brush, and when they had kicked it, they could see there it was. Now, what? Was it a human? Was it animal? I mean, you know, what's it doing there? So they start looking around in the area, the two of them, and they have a stick in their hand, and they see this turquoise thing, and they pick it up and toss it up in the air. They say, it's a bra. Now, what is a bra doing up not too far from where that skull was found? Now they're concerned, and they don't know what to do. So they're a little distance from the Monte CRISTO campground, and they go down there looking for somebody, and there's no one there. Now they're right here. This is where they're located, near the highway, but on the side. Now, who should they contact? The rangers for the National Forest or the Sheriff's Department? You know, what do you do? They didn't know what to do, and when they were at that Monte CRISTO campground, there was nobody there. So they drove down the roadway, and there's a little, they have a little restaurant there. And they went in there, and they used the phone. They called the Sheriff's Department and told them what they had seen up there, and they don't know what it means. And some homicide detectives said, okay, we'll be up there. And within an hour and a half, 2 hours, they arrive up there. And the detectives tell the two hikers, well, now, okay, show us what you found, where it was. They said, well, it's a pretty deserted area. So they went up to the Monte CRISTO campground, went through there, and there's a side road. And they took them back and showed the detectives, this is what we found. We saw the skull. And, you know, where is it located? Well, it's off this pathway. There's a little campsite right behind this bush. There's kind of a slab, a barren area, and the skull was maybe 2,000 feet away from that. So what is going on here? Is it a person who died of natural causes, who was hiking and fell? So the detectives wonder, okay, let's start searching. Well, let's see what we can find. Now, it's very barren area up there. There's not much, as far as places to look, because it's all hillside and streams and boulders. So they're thinking, okay, we've got to do a methodical search here. And they call the coroner's office, and they get a FAR team. This is forensics, anthropology response. And on March 14th, 1992, a group of volunteers for the coroner's office came out and started looking in the area to see what they could find. These are all volunteers, and they all are searching around, and then somebody keeps a log of anything that they find. Well, they're not finding much of anything because they really don't know what are they looking for, but they came across, there's a pelvis. They find a pelvis and a mandible. So we have a number of body parts that are found in the brush there. So more is found, and then they find a pair of handcuffs. What are handcuffs doing a short distance from where all these body parts are found? Doesn't make sense, doesn't add up. So they decide to call out another team. It was the FAR 2 team. On March 27th, 1993, they come out and they're digging. They got their shovels and they have sifters, and they take the dirt, they dump it in the sifters, and they go through and they come across these. And what is it? They're earrings. They're like pearl earrings. And what are they doing out here? And then they come across this ring. There's a ring that is found in all the dirt and the leaves that are there. That what they are finding out is Kimberly Pandelios, she liked those earrings, and she wore those earrings quite often, especially on photo shoots. And those are earrings that she had on that day that she disappeared. So here we have things that are found that Kimberly had been wearing. And as far as the ring, this is a photograph that was taken a year or two earlier, and here you can barely make out that ring. There's that ring that she was wearing in that photograph. So as far as the bra, her husband said, yeah, that was the type of bra that she quite often wore. And when they took it to the crime lab and they inspected it, they noticed there were cut marks. They had been cut with a knife. Look at that. Look at these cuts. Why? Why would a bra be cut with a knife? Now, if somebody had a bra on and they had their hands handcuffed, the only way to get it off would be to cut it off. So, when we got ready for trial, I wanted the jury to understand where everything was found. It was very, very confusing because we had a number of different searches in the area. And here you can see the trail, and then you can see the stream, and where the skull, the mandible was found, the pelvis, kind of on the one side of the trail, and on the other side of the trail was where the earrings and the bra and the ring were found. So that kind of lays that out so the jury could understand. Now, do we know this to be the skull, the remains of Kimberly Pandelios? Well, we got it all together, and then we had her dental records checked, and we got them from Florida. She had gone to a dentist down in Florida, and when we got her records, and sure enough, they match up, and the expert on dental records examined, he said, yeah, it's a positive match. That is the teeth, the mandible of Kimberly Pandelios. So when her body is found, the news media made a big thing of it, and it was on the newscasts for several nights. And there was a gentleman who was watching the news, and he saw this, and he thought, there's a blonde and in the Angeles Crest Forest, and he started thinking about it. Well, yeah, a year ago, I was up there, and it was on February 29th. That's like 2 days after Kimberly's car was found burnt up there. And he was at just above the Monte Cristo campground on the Angeles Crest Highway. And he saw a blonde lady who was handcuffed with these bikers. There was a bunch of bikers there. He had driven up there in his dune buggy, and these bikers came over and told him to get out of there, out of the campsite. But he was kind of curious as to this young blonde lady who had her hands handcuffed with these bikers. So he contacts the sheriff's department and says, hey, I don't know if it makes any sense to you, but a year before I saw this, and so the detectives start checking it out, and they focus on his story about bikers, and because they were located about maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000 feet from where the skull, the mandible, and the pelvic area of Kimberly were found. So time went on for a number of years, 1993, 1994, until 1995. And then something happened on November 16th of 1995. Another model disappears. Her name was Linda Sobek, and she went on a photo shoot, and she never returned. And there was a lot of concern as to why. Why did she disappear, and where could she be? What we do know about it is that the day before, she met with a photographer by the name of Charles Rathbun, and they went to the Denny's restaurant there and talked, and she was interested in a photo shoot that he had advertised, but she really wanted to have him do a portfolio for her. She had her photo book there, and she showed it to him and said, look, I really want it updated. I've done a lot more photo shoots, and could you do it? And he said, yeah, I'd be more than happy to do it for you. But I have this photo shoot of a Lexus SUV that I've got to do up in the desert. And she said, yeah, I'll go with you. And so they left together and went up to the desert. Now, both of them were, professional. He is very well known for auto photography with models, and she was well known as a cheerleader for the Raiders and had done a lot of modeling for Hollywood. Now, when she didn't return, her roommate and her mother, they contacted the police and said, hey, she's missing. She did not return from this photo shoot. So they put this report out, and they supplied all the information. They supplied photographs of her, which the news media got photographs of her, and they displayed it. And on the news on November 21st, they showed photographs of Linda Sobek. And a man was watching the news and saw it, and wow, she looks familiar. And he pulled out some photographs that he had collected. He had found them the day before. He was up picking up the trash up in the Angeles Crest National Forest, and when he went into this trash bin there was these photographs, and he took some of them of this lady. They were very attractive, and here you can see this was where the trash bin was located, right there, Angeles Forest and Angeles Highway. And he kept some of them, and he took them and he compared them up. He noticed a very attractive young lady, and they were good photographs, and these came from Linda's portfolio that she had given to Rathbun to update for her. Now, what were they doing in there? Anyway, the man looked at it and he compared them up and said, this has got to be the same lady. And so he contacts the detectives in the sheriff's department, and he says, you know, I found these photos and it looks like the same lady, Linda Sobek, and there were a lot more. There were a lot more pictures in there. And they said, what? And they said, yeah. I took them to the trash, to the dump area, and they said, where is that? And they said, well, it's Olive Grove Forest Service Yard. He said, you know, we took them all down there in these dumpsters, and they're going to be picked up tomorrow morning, and then it'll be taken to be disposed of at the local dump. So the detectives get in their car with this gentleman, and they go out there, and they see the trash trucks are just there to pick up all the trash. And they're there, and they tell the trash trucks, just wait, give us a few minutes so that we can go through and see if there's anything left here. And they do. They go through the trash, and sure enough, there are these photographs of Linda Sobek. A lot of photographs. And while they're looking through there, they find her day planner, her address book, and it was Linda Sobek's. So now there's no question, but then in all of that trash was a lease agreement. And they look at that lease agreement. It was for a Lexus SUV, and it was signed by a Charles Rathbun. Charles Rathbun had leased that Lexus SUV. So now they have some evidence indicating who that trash belonged to. They contact this Charles Rathbun. They go out there and they talk to him. They say, do you know anything about Linda Sobek? She's disappeared. And he said, oh yeah, you know, I took her on a photo shoot up to the desert. Yeah, we went up to El Mirage Lake, and I was doing some filming for this Lexus SUV. Now, he gave several versions as to what happened, so let me just give you the first version he gave. And he said that, you know, I went up there and we wanted to get pictures at sunset, you know, when the sun was just perfect on the SUV, and Lexus wanted us to show how rough this very nice SUV was, and so we were up there waiting for the sun to go down, and I'd taken some tequila along, and, you know, as photographers and models, you know, it's all photographers play games to see if the model will take their clothes off. And I was doing that with Linda Sobek. And so I had this alcohol, and I gave her some to drink, and she drank it, and, you know, she agreed to have sex with me. And so we had consensual sex up there in the back seat of the SUV. So eventually his versions changed. Then he talked about, yeah, I took her up there, and, you know, it's a dry lake bed, and I knew it was a place where we could do like donuts or wheelies with the SUV, and we could, you know, have the sand spray to make it look how rough this SUV was now that Lexus was putting out. So I was trying to show Linda Sobek, you know, how to do this. So I was demonstrating. I was going around and around in the lake bed and would do these wheelies. And she was standing on the side there. She was real close to it, and I did a quick turn to spray the sand, and it hit her. She got hit by it, and I panicked. You know, it knocked her down, and eventually I noticed she wasn't breathing, and I knew she was dead. And what am I going to do? You know, what am I going to do with her body? So I decided, well, I need to bury it up in the mountains. So I take her body and I drive up to the Angeles National Forest. Most likely it was about 10-15 miles. And I got up there, and there was a very kind of like an abandoned road. It wasn't used much. And I went out there, and there's no one around. And I take her body and I bury it. I dig a grave and I cover it, and I cover it with big boulders. Here you can see the boulders, and he agrees to take the detectives up there and show them, where he had buried her body. So the detectives are up there, and eventually they, do digging around, and they're able to remove those boulders. And once they do, there's her body. It's a very shallow grave, and it was just covered by some sand and dirt there. And the coroner's office, picks up her body and takes her body to the coroner's office for an autopsy. So the next day they do an autopsy, and what did the coroner find out? And this was the coroner's opinion, that those injuries that Linda Sobek had suffered weren't from a traffic accident at all, and they showed that she'd been strangled. She had around her neck, and that went on, and then they said, she had been sodomized, and forcibly sodomized, and they said it looked like a gun, some type of barrel of a gun that had been used. And further, when they did the testing, they found that she had a blood alcohol level of 0.13, fairly well intoxicated, and she didn't drink. So why was she intoxicated? And they said, around her ankles were marks, as though there was some type of cord that had bound her ankles. So that was the opinion of the coroner's office in a trial. That's what they testified to. Now the defense, they came in and said, no. It was all consensual sex, and they had some film that they said was in his camera and was developed, and it shows various sexual positions, and it doesn't show who the female was. It was just of a female body in various sexual positions. He said, no, we never had sodomy. There was no such thing that occurred, and it didn't add up. His testimony did not add up to the facts testified to by the coroner's office. So as a result of the trial, he was convicted of first-degree murder, and at the time of sentencing, he was given a life sentence without the possibility of parole. So that was the end of that Rathbun case. Now, the whole thing came down to these events. Now, if they hadn't have occurred, the case would never have been solved. And it was that trash man who looked in that dumpster and found those photos and kept several of the photos. And then the next day, he watched the news and he recognized it was the same model. And he alerted the detectives from the sheriff's department, and they were able to confiscate before the trash was picked up that next morning. And those detectives were willing to dive into those dumpsters to retrieve all that evidence that was showing that it was a Charles Rathbun who had rented that SUV, and the other photos of Linda Sobek. Now, as far as the location of the bodies of the two models, Kimberly's body was found in 1992 at the Monte Cristo campground area, and it wasn't too far. Maybe it was a mile and a half from where Linda Sobek's body was found, a little bit further up the Angeles Crest Highway. So, the obvious question is, could Kimberly Pandelios' killer be Rathbun? Since the two bodies were found several years apart, but in the same exact area. Well, a thought was maybe he was involved in it. However, not until there was an anonymous caller in November 25th of that year, the detectives received a phone call from somebody in prison who said, hey, you know, you should be looking at a David Rademaker. He was the one that set that model's car on fire. Well, what does all that mean? Well, they received that information, they didn't know what to make of it, and nothing was done with it. So time went by from 1995, 96, 97, up until 1998. There was no further investigation involving Kimberly Pandelios case. Now, it was in March, the detectives, you know, they said, oh yeah, we got that name of a David Rademaker. Well, let's check that name out. And they did. When they ran it, it came back to somebody who was in state prison for a sex on a minor and giving drugs to a minor. And when they said, well, okay, now what was the agency that investigated? They found it was Burbank Police Department. They contacted the detectives over there, and they said, oh yeah, we were involved in this David Rademaker case. There was this 14-year-old that he had sexual relations with and given her drugs, in particular heroin, got her addicted to heroin, and so we brought charges against him, and he was convicted and went to state prison. So the sheriff's detective, okay, do you know anything more about that? And they said, well, you know, when we interviewed this young girl, Manya, she said something about Rademaker was involved in the killing of some model a number of years earlier, but they didn't know what. And the detectives from the sheriff's department were mainly interested in Rathbun because they had just handled the case, and it was a few years before, and she had said no, she didn't know anything about Rathbun at all. She had never met him. So the time went by from 1998, when they had gotten that information from the Burbank detectives. The sheriff's department, you know, they didn't do anything to solve it. So it wasn't until 2004, and what happened then, there was new detectives assigned to Kimberly's case, and they took a look at it, and they saw this name Manya from Burbank, and they contacted her, and now she's a number of years older. She's 19 years old, and they said, what do you know about this David Rademaker? I had dated him and lived with him, as a matter of fact, back in, what was it, 93? Yeah, and he always talked about killing a model up in the mountains, and he would go into details and say it was the Angeles Crest Highway. She was up there, and he would say, oh, she begged for her life, and she said she had a young son, and I had anal sex with her, and then afterwards I drowned her. I put her head in the water of the stream there, and she drowned, and that was the end of her. You know, I went up there, I don't know, several years later. He pulled over and stopped, and he said, yeah, I think it was down there where, you know, I killed this model. And he went down there, and he was gone for about 45 minutes, and then he came back, and he said, yeah, I found her body, and I threw it all over the place. I got rid of it. So Manya said, yeah, I knew all of that, and yeah, he told me all of that. And then time went by, it was maybe February 3rd, 2004. They came across this Cindy, and Cindy had been Rademaker's girlfriend in the 1990s to the 1993, and then she broke up with him. When they contacted her, she said, oh yeah, I don't know about Rademaker. Yeah, I remember back in 1992 that he said, I've always wanted to set a car on fire, and he went up in the mountains, and I went with him, and he got up there, and he got out, and he poured I don't know what it was, lighter fluid or something on the car, and then he lit it. It caught on fire, and he was all excited about it. I don't know what it was all about, but I remember him doing that, and I remember being with him. Then the detective said, would you be willing to, talk to him, meet with him, and be wired up? And she said, yeah, I don't mind doing that. I'll do that for you. So they wired her, and she worked out an arrangement to meet with him. And so Rademaker came over, got in her car, which had the recorder in it. She started asking questions about the model's car that he set on fire. And he said, yeah, that was the model's car that I set on fire, that I took you up at the time. Yeah, that was it. So now they had him on record, tape recording, indicating that he was involved in Kimberly's car being set on fire. So the detectives arrest him on March 3rd, 2004, and it was 12 years after Kimberly was killed and disappeared. So when it came time to trial, I wanted to make it easy for the jury because it was a complicated case, because there were so many different dates, there was so much evidence that was found at various times, and it was important that the jury could understand what it was. So I put this together so that the prosecutors who were trying the case in court could explain it to the jury, and the jury wouldn't be confused with the facts. Now, the defense was kind of interesting. Was based on him not testifying. He did not testify at his trial. He relied on his attorney to attack the fact that maybe that skull really wasn't Kimberly, maybe that's somebody else's. And then they attacked Manya and Cindy. They were just out to get him. They were making this story up that he had something to do with killing this model up in the mountains. As to the tape recording, they said, well, it wasn't really clear what he was referring to. Could be misunderstood. But the big thing that the defense relied on were those bikers that this one witness said he saw up very close to where the skull was found, Kimberly. And it was 2 days after her car was found burned up there. And they had claimed, that individual said that there was a blonde who was handcuffed, and the inference was that it wasn't Rademaker who did it, but the bikers. However, the jury listened to the evidence. They convicted him of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life without the possibility of parole. Now, what lessons can be learned in it? Well, Rademaker, there's no question, is a predator. Rathbun, more of an opportunist. They both picked up models, took them on photo shoots to remote areas, up in the desert, up in the mountains. And it was risky, and both Kimberly and Linda ended up dead just off the Angeles Crest Highway in the north mountains of Los Angeles. Very risky to go on photo shoots or auditions for remote areas with an individual. However, they thought it was worth it, but it wasn't worth it. It cost them both their lives. Well, hopefully you found this episode interesting as well as informative. If you want more information on the Rademaker case, get my book, The Top Gun Prosecutor. Don't forget to subscribe to the podcast. Generally, we have a new podcast every Friday at 3 p.m. Well, hopefully you will join us again for another True Crime Files of Los Angeles podcast, when we will discuss another case from beginning to end. See you then.